Running into a Wendigo on a seemingly innocent hike is not how most of us would like to spend our weekend. Today we will be kicking things off with a story detailing just that. Then I will be telling a couple of paranormal stories that are truly unsettling to say the least. A huge thank you to the writers. Remember, you can send stories to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, a like and a comment is always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I honestly don't know where to start, or if I'm ready to be posting this story of mine, but hopefully it'll help. I know you won't believe me, and honestly, I won't even blame you guys. It still doesn't make sense in my own head. I've heard stories about unknown creatures in woods, but never thought I'd encounter one myself, you know? I posted another story about some creepy old people that I had encountered in the woods, but that's nothing. This makes a good horror story for people, but it eats me every day. But here we go. I love to go hiking. I go with my 3-year-old German Shepherd, and let her go unleashed, since we like to go to secluded places. Now I've been hiking all over the Utah mountains, and wanted a new hike that wasn't too far from me. I have an app that tells me about hikes near me, if it's a hard hike, reviews, and if it's dog friendly. Now I was scrolling through AllTrail looking for possibly something new, but I wasn't too hopeful. But to my delight, there was something new. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember it was at the bottom of the list, and it had one review saying, good. I thought that was kind of strange. Mostly because people love to review hikes, and try to tell the city what they can do to improve the hike, and make it more safe. But I figured it wasn't a popular hike, so the next day Kyrie and I packed up our stuff, and went up towards the hike. I always carry a first aid kit, extra food, a knife, and just emergency stuff in case I get lost. It's important to mention now that Kyrie eats a raw diet, meaning she eats raw meat, not cooked. And since we're going so early in the morning, I thought I could bring some with us. I put it in her blue backpack I make her wear, and decided when it was getting warmer we would stop to eat. Where I live, there's a long drive through the canyon, and many roads going towards the hike you'd like to go on. This one was a little farther than I'm used to, but I didn't care. It was new, and I was excited, and so was Kyrie. She cries in the car until we get there. Now I was following the directions on my phone, and saw that it had led me towards a thin road that was hidden. No wonder I haven't heard of this place. It was hidden and far up in the mountain. The road only fit one car, so the whole time I was so anxious that another car would come down, and how I would handle that, but there never was. I never saw another car. When I got to the parking lot, if I could even call it that, I noticed there was only space for like 3 cars, all in a tight space. It was small, so I decided to park my car with the front facing toward the road. I thought maybe it was private property. Checked in the app, but it didn't say anything about private property. I shrugged it off, got Kyrie out, prepared us, and saw the trail. Now even though I knew there wasn't anyone parked there, I kept Kyrie on a leash. I didn't know if there were bikers along the trail, but after 30 minutes or so I didn't see anyone, so I decided to let her off the leash. It was a steep hike for the first half, but it was beautiful. We were deep in the woods, and I felt at peace. I used to wear headphones when I hiked, but didn't anymore, so I was enjoying the natural sounds of the forest. It was still early in the morning, so I wore a light jacket, and decided when it got warmer, I'd give Kyrie her breakfast. Now, before you start to hate, I know bringing Kyrie's raw meat was absolutely stupid and ignorant of me. I'd never seen a bear or a wolf or anything, so I got cocky, and just thought it was okay. I learned my lesson the bad day. So, no need to tell me I was dumb, but honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you commented that. Now here's where we begin the bad part of the story. The trail finally stopped being steep, and sort of an easy hike from here. When you got to the top, you could see through the trees a beautiful open meadow. On the other side of it, you can hear a river and a waterfall. The trail went around the meadow. The meadow was absolutely beautiful with the mountains in the background, the sound of the water. The hike was almost the most beautiful one I had ever been to. When Kyrie and I were sort of in the center of the meadow, She stopped right in front of me and looked towards the meadow. Kyrie always walked ahead of me, and when she stopped, I stopped, since I trusted her judgment. Before I could look, the smell hit me first. You know, the typical rotting smell, but God, words can't explain how bad it stunk. It burned my nose and started to make me tear up. I put my shirt over my nose, feeling nauseous, and looked over to where Kyrie was looking. In the middle of the meadow was a deer. Now, I've only seen does, but never a male deer in person, but his antlers were huge. Have you ever seen Princess Mononoke, when he sees the deer spirit walking across the water and how big his antlers were? Almost like that. The beauty of the deer was amazing, but not enough to take away the disgusting smell that was making me sick. The deer was looking towards the mountains and away from me. I thought maybe Kyrie's food was going bad. I checked that and it seemed fine. When I looked up again, the deer was looking towards our direction. I noticed that Kyrie's hackles went up to that. She started to cry nervously. Now, I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I am Native American. It is common for these creatures to be in our childhood stories. That and also listening to scary stories on YouTube. Now, when Kyrie did that, I got a bad feeling in my stomach despite the sickness. It was a Wendigo, and I knew that. Now, I didn't know what to do. These creatures were only a part of my stories to make me go to bed, not to instructions of what to do. Plus, my grandmother was one with the stories and passed away. She was the one with the experience, not my mom or anyone else. I glanced at Kyrie again when she cried and looked back towards the creature. It started to stand on its hind legs. Holy hell, it was tall. And it faced my direction. It started to walk towards me. I was going to run until I heard in my head, I am the one of this land. Suddenly it started to run towards me, full speed. I screamed, called Kyrie, and started to run. Kyrie was following behind me. I started to cry as I was running since I could hear it catch up to me. It was loud. It was destroying everything it came in contact with to get to me. The adrenaline running through me was making me just focus on the running. I didn't know where to go. I just kept going. The trail suddenly got smaller and bushes with thorns started to appear, but I didn't feel them as they cut my arms. As I heard it get closer, it suddenly went to the left as I ran straight. I somehow had the balls to look back to see if it was gone. But also Kyrie. Kyrie? I said, but right as I called out for her, the trail ended with a foot drop onto a patch of rocks. I hit my head, bleeding a bit. But again, I couldn't feel it that much and just got up. I looked towards the forest when I suddenly heard a loud cry from my right. It was Kyrie. Kyrie! I cried out. I stood up crying and had a loss of what to do. I looked back to see a river leading up to the waterfall I heard. Suddenly a heavy weight ran into me and we both fell back. I hit my head again on the back and looked up to see Kyrie. Kyrie had blood all over her. It was pouring from her neck. Kyrie? I cried out. She still had her backpack on with some cuts in it. Before I had a chance to help her, a scream came from the forest. I looked back at the waterfall, and somehow had the strength to pick up my 85-pound dog and carry her. I don't know where I was planning to go. I was just running to the waterfall as if it was a safe place. I was almost there when I heard the creature land on the rocks that I did earlier. I tripped at that and looked back to see it looking at me. Its eyes were black, or so I think. It could also be that there wasn't anything in there. I don't know. I took off Kyrie's backpack and threw it towards the monster, hoping it would take the meat and just leave us alone. I was scooting back towards the waterfall, crying as I did so, holding and dragging Kyrie with my left arm. I found that being so close to the creature made me literally weak to my knees. It walked over to me, taking huge steps. It looked so different than before. Before it looked like a deer, and now as it crawled over to me it looked like a monster. I don't know how else to describe this awful demon. I just don't, and I'm sorry for that. But I felt water hit my head hard as I had reached the waterfall. I kept going until I was up against the wall. There was barely enough space where water wasn't hitting Kyrie and I's faces. Kyrie felt limp at this point. I could somewhat see the creature through the water, but still saw it coming towards me. It stood on its hind legs when it was close enough to me, watching me. The smell was so disgusting, I couldn't help but throw up in my mouth. It reached its arms out to grab me. I screamed so loud I actually lost my voice. After I let out that scream, another scream came from the deep forest. The creature snapped its head almost completely backward, looking towards the scream. The scream sounded like the one this had let out earlier. I was still holding on to Kyrie, crying and screaming since its arm was close. It looked back at me, pulling its arm away, and again said in my mind, I am the one of this land. With that, it took steps back, watching me, and went down the riverbank. It crawled on all fours, stopping next to Kyrie's backpack. It ripped it apart, and pulled out the meat, eating it with a plastic bag that it was in. It suddenly screamed and ran towards the direction of the scream from earlier. When I thought it was gone, I stood up shakily, and carried Kyrie towards the trail again. When I was running, I came across my backpack that I had left earlier and stopped. It was ripped apart, so I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Kyrie's neck, where she was bleeding a lot. After that, I barely remember. All I remember is carrying Kyrie and driving down, screaming the whole way towards the emergency vet. They asked us what happened, and I told them it was a bear. They called the ambulance since I had blood all over me, and they couldn't tell if it was mine or Kyrie's. Kyrie made it through surgery, and had to have some stitches on her, along with a pad. It didn't really heal, and a huge bump grew on there. It had been infected, but eventually got better. She also had a bite mark on the top of her left eye, but that healed much better. They pulled out a 4-inch tooth. I don't have it because I couldn't even look at it. But they declared it from a bear, even though they said it looked weird. While I was waiting for Kyrie, I went to look up the trail on the app, and it was gone. I don't know why or how, but it is. I don't remember where it is either. That's all a blur to me. I haven't been hiking since, and I refused to let Kyrie go. That time my mom took her. She did it while I was at work, but regretted it because she said Kyrie was crying, and was so scared they just had to go home. My mom knows. I screamed at night from nightmares for a week or two. My mom put white candles in my room to get rid of the bad spirits attracted to my negativity. So, yeah. That's my story. I've heard stories where people saw a Wendigo and they didn't get harmed, and God, I wish I went through that. I hate hiking. My therapist thinks I may have PTSD, and only knows of it as a bear. I'm getting through it. Kyrie is too. Hopefully one day I can go back, but I don't see that being for a while. Please, if you're going to go up to the mountains, please prepare. Mother Nature is not only unpredictable, but has things in there that don't make sense in our heads. So be safe. I say this with serious sincerity. Thanks for reading. Since early in my childhood till my teenage years, I had been sleeping with my blanket tucked under my feet. Every night, from as early as I can remember, when I decided I was going to sleep, I would lift my legs in the air, then place my feet over the extra blanket, and I only liked having my feet tucked in. I hated being tucked in from the sides, because I would feel too warm and constricted, and I almost always slept with my arms out, or my upper body completely uncovered, but my feet always tucked in. The short moments I would lay in bed with my feet untucked when I would feel a light breeze under them, I could feel them grow darker as the seconds went by, and get increasingly freaked out by the flickering hazy lights and shadows cast from the window onto the walls, and images of creepy figures and creatures would plague my younger mind. I would start imagining scary figures all around the hidden places in my room. One on all fours, right on the other side of my bedroom door, a formless, undecipherable being in the shadows of the corners of my room, where no matter how much I squinted my eyes, all I could see was a static-ridden darkness, as well as one with long fingers under my bed. All of these were fueled by the ghost stories I'd heard from my friends and family, the bits of horror movie scenes I'd catch while my sister was watching them, or even trailers for paranormal reality TV shows I'd catch while watching TV. But when I tucked in my feet and felt that my lower body was no longer in the open, though I would still occasionally get startled by the movements in the corner of my eyes, usually from passing cars' headlights, I instantly felt much more secure. Then somehow as years went by, as I grew older and was no longer so afraid of the boogeyman or ghosts, and the spooky stories or horror movies or shows would no longer haunt me at random moments of the night. I wasn't really afraid as I laid in my bed at night anymore, and it was probably thanks to the fact that I had decided I just plain did not like the feeling of being afraid, and never let myself watch a horror movie, or start watching those paranormal TV shows, and basically just avoided spooky stuff all around like I was allergic to it, and I can't really remember when it is exactly. But sometime in my late teens, I started falling asleep, passing out, while on my iPad before I could tuck myself in. Then my habit of sleeping with my feet tucked in soon got broken, and I was fine with that. It was also around that time that I started getting cramps in one toe, or at least that's what I thought they were, ever so often during the nights. It'd always start with my pinky, then a few days later my fourth toe, then the middle, etc., all the way to my big toe. Then it'd start all over again with my other foot. The time in between the cramps would always have been random. Sometimes they'd happen in consecutive nights. Sometimes a few days would go in between. Sometimes even weeks. I think the break I get after one foot is done is longer, but it might just be my imagination. I'm not sure. I don't keep close track of it. I mean, I never gave it much thought until now, as it wasn't something I was losing sleep over, at least not much. I always just put it to age, plus the fact that I've been less and less physically active. I'm not even sure what any of this information has to do with anything, but it's what I've noticed over the past few years. Then one night, all hell broke loose. Well, not really. Well, actually, maybe really. In my head, at least. Usually whenever I get these cramps, when I would get woken in the middle of the night by this dull, numbing, sharp kind of aching pain in one of my toes. I can't really describe it well. You guys will just have to imagine it. What I would usually do is that I would sleepily, slowly bend my toes or ankle back and forth to try to dissipate the pain till it goes away. But one night, precisely 8 days ago at the time of me writing this, as I was slowly moving my toes and ankles, the pain got increasingly bad in my middle toe. It was the first time that had happened, and at that time, at that moment, in that almost unbearable pain, I just thought I would try and kick or shake my leg to try and stop the cramp from getting worse. I mean, I didn't even think about it. I never thought about it. I never put thought into what I was doing in the middle of the night, or my one aching toe while I was half asleep. Thump is the sound that was made. Kind of like you kick the back of someone's leather car seat. And that's when I felt it. I felt my foot hit against something. My foot, ladies and gentlemen, hit against something. Or someone. My foot hit against something that was cold, hard, skinny, and fleshy. And as soon as I'd made contact with my foot, as soon as I'd almost immediately curled my legs up against my chest, squeezed my eyes shut, and held my body against myself in a fetal position, laying there in my room, very unfortunately probably not alone, I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. I couldn't even open my eyes. I was laying there in the pitch black darkness of my eyelids, and the night, and in complete silence, hoping, praying, I could just pass out from fear, so that I didn't have to deal with anything from anything. And that was one thing that I noticed while I was laying there, unbearably conscious. It was silence. After the initial thump and my shuffling into a fetal position, there was no other sound. Everything just went quiet. That meant that either, one, I'd just imagined whatever that had transpired, and should have just stopped freaking out and fallen back asleep, but my reaction to whatever I felt was just so primal and real. I really had a hard time just brushing it off. Two, whatever I'd hit vanished into thin air, and is forever gone. My one accidental, unintentional kick kicked it into the fifth dimension, and I'd never have to deal with it again. Three, whatever it is that I had just hit was still there in my room, and it was still waiting. It was maybe at the bottom of my bed standing there, hovering over me, or crawled on the floor, waiting, watching, listening. The thought that something might possibly be there, at the foot of my bed, inches away from me, at that moment, when I felt fear so primal and unshakable. The thought of it disturbs me in an indiscernible way. I don't know how to explain this. but in that moment, I could somehow feel that I had disturbed it. Like it was kind of annoyed or angry, but not exactly. I just knew that I had somehow disturbed it, and that wasn't good, and that whatever emotion or state of being it was emanating caused me to feel a deep, powerful kind of fear like I had never felt before. Furthermore, that would also mean that all those nights in the past few years, I didn't want to think about that. I couldn't even begin to process that information, and I don't want to. That night I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I got woken up like usual by the morning sunlight. For half a second, I had forgotten about the events that had transpired the night before, and it was just laying there in a haze of confusion. But immediately the memories of last night had come back and hit me like a truck. I jolted up from my bed and span around the room, looking for anything unusual. The fear from the previous night still lingered, but under the sunlight, I was a lot less afraid. And a night's sleep, or the few hours I got, helped clear my head a little. Carefully, I got out of bed. Still a little fearful, I walked up to the foot of my bed, studying my wooden floor for any sign of there being something. I don't know what I was expecting, like there would be a remaining shadow, or the wood would be charred, but there was nothing. I paced around my room thinking, well, also looking for any sign of intrusion. I looked everywhere around the room, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Then I remembered, under my bed, and sure enough, when I pushed my bed to the side and revealed the dirty floor, there was a clearly clean spot in the middle near the bottom, and dust lint formed a U-shape, about 2/3 the size of my queen bed. After staring at that dust-free spot for a while, I silently pushed my bed back into place. Now what? Today marks the 8th day since that incident. I'm writing this. Started writing this in the afternoon at a friend's place. Well, now the sun has just started to set. Though I'm not 100%, I'm almost certain that over the years, I've felt one of my toes cramp up in a hotel room, or while I was over at someone else's place. So I know it's not my house. For the past few days, I've been thinking about this, doing some research on the web with no heads or tails, and that's when I stumbled upon this subreddit. I've been writing in hopes of seeing the absurdity of this, and turning this into what I hope it is, a scary story that I've conjured up from my imagination. But as I was typing this down, all the events and what I had felt have only become clearer, and more worrisome for me. In addition, more and more brief memories of my younger self being afraid at night is surfacing. What I'm really worried about is that all those moments in the past that I'd been able to put away as my head doing tricks to me in the dark have some figment of truth to them. I don't know what to think anymore. The sun is setting, it's getting darker, and I'm getting afraid. I am afraid. Though I knew it wouldn't stop that thing from coming. I thought that having the company of a friend would help, but I'm not so sure anymore. I really hope this is just me going crazy from stress. Though this sure is a weird way to go crazy. I can feel it's going to come soon. Maybe tonight, if not tomorrow. And I have no idea what to do when it does. Before I begin my story, I want to provide some context by telling you about myself. I would like you to understand that I'm a man of science, and that I will not believe in something that I haven't seen, or that hasn't been documented by a peer-reviewed authority. So astral projection is out. I'm not religious, though I was as a child, and a younger adult. I am a 23-year-old data infrastructure specialist in Florence, Alabama. The rest of my family lives in Killen, and Killen is where a majority of these stories will take place. When I was born, my mother was a nurse on the night shift at ECM Hospital. My father was a pilot for Southwest and a former naval aviator. When I was 3, my brother Wayne was born. When I was 6, my father shot himself in the chest with a Colt 45, and my family moved in with my grandmother. My mother remarried Benjamin, a social worker for a prestigious university in Birmingham. He is a medical professional like my mother, so they've always believed that they could see a document. We bought a house in Killen, built in 1920-something, and started our life together. There are a few experiences that I remember from my childhood, but I'd say that's because my parents did an excellent job of hiding the truth from my brother and I, that our new house was pretty haunted. My first memory of anything strange had to be walking to my parents' room in the middle of the night. across the other side of the house, and seeing a bright, glowing orb above the banister leading into the kitchen. I didn't know about the orb phenomena until much later, although that is what I chalk it up to at the present. For me, the greatest threat I ever perceived was that of being watched near constantly. It was unshakable, but I just explained it to myself as God or Daddy watching me from above. Perhaps I was misbehaving. My parents, on the other hand, began to see a great many things. Most of the encounters were either audiological or visual, but never both. They later told me of the conversations that would take place in the next room, which we were blamed for, at least at first, or of the shadows of a man in the next room, only to walk away if you approached. So far, it was some petty Scooby-Doo stuff. Then my father watched the Automan movie. He claims that this particular encounter happened maybe a year or two into our stay in the house. He had been laid off recently, and anyone who has been unemployed for a good amount of time knows that your sleep schedule tends to change. He was up at about 3 a.m. reading a book when he heard what he described as perfect silence. I could hear my own heartbeats. This causes him to look up, only to see the ottoman, which rocks, as it was designated for a rocking chair, to scoot across the floor very quickly without rocking, as if an equal amount of force had been applied to the top and bottom. He also says that when he looked up, all 4 of the cats had their ears pinned back, their heads locked on the ottoman. He is convinced that they could see whatever did this. After that, nothing happens to my parents. They attempted to make contact, to record an interaction with the entity. I believe that it avoided them on purpose. My brother, who is about 6 when he starts his part in my story, becomes the other family's new focus. He claims that throughout his childhood, he saw a woman with straight black hair, loveless eyes, and fingers like knives in the utility room every time he'd get a glass of water in the middle of the night. The kitchen connects to the utility room. He claims this went on for years. Fast forward a few years, I'm 15 and he's 12. And my brother moves out of what was once our shared room into the former Braves/playroom. The walls are painted white, with red and blue accents, with Atlanta Braves memorabilia hanging all over the walls. He apparently immediately began to see the woman in the room with him, as well as a tall man. She would tickle his feet and sit on the end of his bed. He also described waking up to find her dangling from the ceiling, her arms flailing. He told me that the man would be hovering above his bed, inches away from his face, or sitting on a non-existent chair in the corner, his head in his hands, moving like he was crying. It is important to note that I am only being watched while all of this is happening. My brother probably attempted to open up to me about it and I dismissed him, because I was afraid of ghosts. He told my parents about the feet tickling, but left everything else out. My father spent a night in the room alone, and came out reporting that nothing had happened, but he told the ghost to leave my brother alone. For a time, I think they did. About the same time, maybe a few months later, I saw a figure in the reflection of my vacuum tube TV. It was probably nothing. Later that night, I saw a figure in the corner. I froze, my eyes locked on the figure until he blinked out of existence. I saw my first apparition. Later that same week, I was laying on my side in bed, back towards the wall, my feet bundled under my blankets, when I felt her fingers run along my toes, slowly and forcefully. She then scratched my feet, as one would scratch the head of a purring kitty cat. I looked up and saw her. She was Slav squatting on my footboard, her hair so straight it could have been a hood, her figure so black that I cannot properly describe the color. Think devoid of all light. When I looked at her, I literally felt fear and terror clutch at my chest. I couldn't move, I could only stare. She too blinked out of existence. So I told my mom, who then told me that the house was haunted, but not to tell my brother. Apparently he had downplayed his experiences to the point where my parents thought the feet thing was just a dream. Now Mom had 2 people who were claiming the exact same thing. It is important to note that my brother did not describe the woman to me until after I met her. I later asked him to describe her, which matched the initial description above. These encounters became normal, and I eventually left for the military. I was medically separated in ways into my contract, just short of 2 years, and returned home. I was angry, bitter, and had an incredibly short fuse. I'd always wanted to fly planes for the Navy like my biological father had done. It was at this point that I had a coming to Jesus with the other family. I had taken on a job at Walmart stocking shelves, and would get home at about 12:30 at night. I came home, sat down at my computer, and played video games for hours before trying to go to bed at around 5:30. She wouldn't let me. She scratched my feet, I sat up in bed, and told her to screw off. She would disappear. I'd laid back down, and drift asleep. This was my night for almost a week. That Friday was no exception. At about 6:10 a.m., she knocked my Pip-Boy off my desk. I stood up, collected the Pip-Boy, and set it back on the desk. I was angry. I was pent up from a long day at work, and I was hoping to get some sleep. The Pip-Boy was the last straw. I offered a profanity-laced rant to no particular spot in my room, with the hopes that she would hear me. I was a hiccup's breath away from losing my crap. My garbage can fell over behind me. I turned around and screamed, top of my lungs, at the complete blackness that was standing right behind me. I still couldn't move, but I could scream. I screamed and screamed and screamed some more, until I was out of breath. My mom came into my room to find me just crying, huddled down on the ground. I remember apologizing for the mess and insisting that it wasn't my fault, and that I was so very sorry I woke her up, but that's all. My father says that everyone does that, or can do that, if they just go over the edge. He says that I had a psychotic break from all of the stress. He says the ghost wasn't there. That was 3 years ago. I have a daughter now and moved into a duplex down the road from the same grandmother we stayed with so many years ago. Last night, my father saw a little girl. Apparently she woke him up to ask where her mother was, before running out of the room. He called me this morning and apologized for not believing me. I'm sorry for writing such a long story. I haven't told very many people, and I wanted to see if anyone else had any explanations. Thank you.